Welcome to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I'm joined by Rachel.
Hey, y'all.
And Jess.
Hello, world.
And Alex.
Yo,
MTV Raps. For some reason, that's what came to mind when you said yo, but I think that word is synonymous to me and MTV Raps. Anyways, sorry. Speaking of MTV, that's something that makes me feel young, to reminisce about the days when music videos ruled the airwaves of MTV, and you could root for your favorite band on Total Request Live. Yeah,
it was blocked. We didn't have MTV.
Oh yeah,
as a child, as a young lad.
How was it blocked? Was it blocked because you didn't have cable, or was it blocked?
I'm sure my dad worked in the technology industry, and he found ways to do everything before their time.
No, like block channels and stuff.
So, unlike Grace University, which had channels you were not allowed to watch, but they weren't actually blocked, and I got in trouble once for watching Fifth Wheel. Got called in by the RA.
Goodness.
And
no,
it was actually on an allowable channel, but then we got in trouble for watching it.
Wait, what is Fifth Wheel? Can you explain? I don't even know if I know what this is.
I think it was like a dating show where you basically there were 5 people, and then one of you would end up being like the fifth wheel. Like 2 of the people would connect, and then basically one of them would get voted off. So it'd be like maybe 3 guys and 2 girls were there, and then the 2 girls would hit it off with 2 of the guys, and then the other person is just fifth wheel in it.
I remember Date My Mom. Wasn't that one on
Wow.
MTV?
That is...
What? I thought
taking you back.
No, that's just wild. I did not watch that one.
Oh, yeah, I don't think I did. That was this isn't an MTV show, but it made me think of that wife swap show where those always brought out some interesting characters.
Yeah.
But back on the topic of youth. What is something that you can do? What was it, an activity? I mean, I'd like to say something like, whenever I hit the slopes, I just feel so young, but I don't really ski. I've never really skied. I'm terrible at balancing on things.
What do I do now that makes me feel young?
Is there anything?
It's a great question.
Thank you. I will answer.
Yeah, I was going to say, Jess, please answer. This was your question,
me.
So I feel like you need to answer.
No pressure. Okay, well, one of the things that makes me feel young is when a song comes on the radio that maybe I listened to back in high school.
Like No Scrubs by TLC.
Yes. Any boy bands. And I have friends that like Marco Polo. I love that app. If anybody uses it's a great way to keep...
#ad.
It's just a great way to keep in contact with my inner circle. And I'll call and record myself singing it. And it just takes me back, to those days. Young, carefree.
Man, I did not expect Marco Polo to be a thing still.
I feel like it's a big thing with women, because all my friends are on it and use it all the time.
Maybe it's like a...
I do have a bro. I have 2 friends that I'm on Marco Polo with, and usually it's like, we all have our phones and our mounts in our car, and so that's usually like when we get updates on life.
That's when I do it. Yeah. Absolutely.
So
you should start doing this.
Yeah.
A song comes on there.
We almost left
record.
We almost left Marco Polo together when you could no longer watch in 2 times speed. They made you start paying for that.
Oh yeah.
So, but ours are much. Our wives also have one, and theirs are like 3 hours long. They're like putting on makeup, and I'm like, "What is that still going?" And so ours are like 5 minutes. Woke up, brushed my teeth, went to the bathroom. Work was good.
Sounds like a diary.
And taking the kids to practice tonight. So that's usually hours. So
Eric, you over there downloading it?
Yeah, I'm re-logging into it.
So Eric must not be the bro.
He is not the bro.
Shoot.
Oh.
Yeah.
I'll have to re-engage. Does that anything else other than Marco Polo that kind of makes?
No, I was talking about the songs.
Oh, the song.
So I just
I got hung up
Marco
on Marco Polo.
But
especially boy bands.
I'll say mine when I sometimes go to a friend's house or whatever, and I see a skateboard. I had the skater phase. So there's moments where I'll
see you later, boy.
Jump on someone else's. I did say that, yes. And I would jump on someone's skateboard and do a little, maybe a kickflip or try to just an ollie, you know, and I'm like, oh, I still got it.
Yeah.
Do you still have it?
I mean, sometimes I still have it.
I love it.
Tony Hawk is doing like this thing on TikTok right now where he goes around and says, do a kickflip. And then most people don't even know who Tony Hawk is.
Which is my favorite thing right now is that people are like, who are you?
Yeah. They're like, you look a lot like Tony Hawk, but a lot older. Yeah. And he's like, oh, thanks. It is me. But then he gives him something if they do a kickflip.
Those are fun videos. So
that's fun.
That's awesome. I feel like I have a couple of things. One thing that I do, it makes me feel younger, but it also makes me feel older at the same time. Trampoline parks. I don't know if you guys have ever been to those.
Yes, I have.
Whenever I have gone and I'm like, oh, this is great. I can't believe I'm like out here doing this, like with the kids. But then like during it, you're like, wow, I'm really a lot older than I thought I was. This is not as fun as it could be if I was a kid.
What kind of tricks? Like, what are your trampoline tricks?
Just, the one where you like jump like up. That's it. Yeah.
Like not the double bounce, like try to get your friends.
That's too scary for me. So yeah.
Jump up. Those were the days. I remember when I could jump.
Just up and down for 3 hours. Those are good old times.
Yeah. Or just when friends like contact you and they're like, hey, you want to go get, dinner really quick tonight? Or like just something where it's like you didn't plan it. That makes me feel like, in college when you're just like, let's go.
Taco Bell.
Yeah. Like at 1 a.m. or whatever. So that makes me feel younger.
Are you guys all looking at me?
Your turn.
You're up. And you're the oldest.
Yeah, I think I am. That's sad. Not really. I don't know what makes me feel young.
Maybe it is TLC.
A lot of things I think will make me think about my youth. I feel like I'm getting to the point where it kind of just makes me sad sometimes. So it's like I don't really like those feelings always. Probably my favorite movie of all time is Back to the Future. And every time I was homesick from school, I had the VHS where I recorded it off the TV. And I would go put that in and I'd hang out on the couch and watch that movie over and over again. So pretty much anytime I put Back to the Future in, it takes me back to just like, hey, I have no responsibility.
Yeah.
I'm just sitting here on this couch enjoying this movie. Fun side note, a lot more swear words in that movie than I remember as a child because the TV version was very edited.
Yes.
And I bought the Blu-ray and was like, oh, whoops. Didn't know that. But yeah, I think that's one thing. A lot of like our old TV shows and stuff like that from, does anybody, this is going to age me. Does anybody remember Hey Dude?
Hey Dude, yeah, I do.
From Nickelodeon?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
They used to have such good shows.
I love that show. That one would bring me back. And I can't find it. I can't find it streaming anywhere, but that was TV. That's where I'm most nostalgic probably. And jumping, but I don't do much of jumping anymore.
Chris Cross will make you.
Well, now that we've all had a trip down memory lane, we are going to jump into some headlines, but first I'm going to go download Marco Polo. Our first headline comes from BBC.com. It says Amazon changes app logo that resembles Adolf Hitler. I don't know. I noticed the new app icon right away on my phone. I was like, hey, look at this. They did something kind of cool. It's a little different. It's not just like all these other, blue and white icons that I'm used to. And it's not a shopping cart because that doesn't make sense for Amazon. You don't actually ever use a shopping cart when you shop there.
That's true.
Ever. So that's neat. It looks like a box with a piece of tape on it. But some people pointed out that where the tape was aligned with its kind of jaggedy edge above the Amazon smiley face looked like a Hitler mustache. The side-by-side comparison photo that they provide here on BBC.com could allow you to see that resemblance, but I, for one, have never seen Adolf Hitler smile. But according to that's one thing where I feel like it falls apart a little bit for me. Why are you laughing, Jess?
I'm not laughing.
I'm just being honest. I've watched. I
want to Google right now if
I don't know.
Adolf
I'm sure
Hitler
there's a
smiling.
photo, maybe, but like I've watched so many World War II documentaries, and I'm very fascinated with.
It's hard to think of that as a happy person.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was saying. Anyways, they updated the logo.
Okay, she found some.
Okay, great. I'm sure there are photos of it. I'm just saying I don't always associate him with smiles.
Yeah.
Okay.
They updated the app right away with a piece
now.
of tape that was more straight edged with the side kind of peeling off a little bit. Look. So I think that solved the problem.
Well, it looked like that they rolled this out in Europe first, and then they rolled out. So we never, I don't think ever in the U.S. saw the
other one,
the cut off tape, jagged edged one. But that's partly why they changed it before we ever saw it. So there's probably not as much outrage in the U.S. because we never actually had it launched. But then we're outraged that it ever came out anywhere.
I don't think I would have ever even put that together though either.
Like
unless it was pointed out to me like that, I never would have even.
I feel like the tape would have needed to be narrower to be like a Hitler mustache.
And it just shows you like perspective is like huge and stuff. It's just like someone clearly saw this and, was offended by it, but it's just your perspective.
Yeah, I think it's digging. Definitely digging for a reason to get mad. When I like, even as I'm looking at it now, I'm like, it would take a long time for me to ever like consider, oh, that reminds me of him. So,
well,
I guess I'm not thinking
anything
about
big companies like this. If they're doing something as big as changing their app logo, you think they probably have gone through a huge process of like picking what they should do, brainstorming, running it by people. Obviously, they were slowly releasing it to other, countries. It's not like they didn't just think through every possibility with this. It's just kind of crazy because it's like you can do as much as you possibly can with something and then put it out there
and somebody's gonna
and then
see
realize
something.
Exactly, okay, we never would have caught that or never would have even thought that.
But somewhere an intern from Amazon is smiling because he's like, that was mine. They said I couldn't get the actual look. That was the render I had, and now they had to go back to it.
Oh.
So. Or there's someone who was saying, I told you it looked like Adolf's mustache.
Yeah.
They didn't listen. It's another example of the internet making changes quick in this culture. People getting upset and changing it. I don't know.
I think it makes more of an impact to validate the person or the people. I'm assuming it was more than just a couple,
right.
Especially in Europe. If that was like a sensitive thing, it means more to validate those people, even if it was a smaller portion, than to have an article that says Amazon refuses to.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
That's just kind of where we're at.
Yeah.
It doesn't look good anyways. Like
Right.
what battle are you actually winning at that point other than just being stubborn?
My app is still a cart.
Oh, that's because you're on an Android.
Yep.
Sorry.
I think that's why. So I was a little behind.
There's a lot of, they're waiting. They just want to make sure
they want to get it perfect.
They're focus testing it with Apple users to see if this looks like anyone else's mustache.
Doesn't look like yours.
No. All right. Our next headline comes from Omaha.com. It says former Blue Jay Josh Dolzler, in reference to Greg McDermott's plantation remarks, show how far we need to go. Now, a little update on this story. As I understand it, is Coach Greg McDermott. They lost a pretty passionate game recently, and in the locker room, he made a reference to staying on the plantation, and I guess it was supposed to be taken motivationally. That didn't go over well, obviously, for many reasons.
Yeah, I know. Like, I was reading it yesterday. It kind of blew up. When I first saw it, I saw that he issued an apology. Greg McDermott did on Twitter. And so I'm like, oh, what happened? Obviously, I read it. And he said after that game, I think it was on the 27th, they lost to Xavier and they got upset. And he said that he felt terrible because he said to the team he wanted to keep them together. And he said, guys, we got to keep our feet here. We got to stay on the plantation together. We can't leave the plantation. That's what he said. And said that in the locker room to the guys on the team, obviously the coaches that were there, obviously, or if you don't know Creighton's basketball team, the makeup of their team, there's not a lot of white guys on the team, so he's got coaches, he's got players that are African American, players. And so a word like that is obviously going to be deeply sensitive. And the other part is he's like, that's not even something that's part of my vocabulary. I didn't hear it anywhere. So to me, that was part of it, like, that made it more difficult. I think if he was like, I grew up in the Midwest or in South or whatever, and we just used to say that, and I used to hear my grandpa say it all the time and just jest, and he's like, it just came out of nowhere, and I think for a lot of people, that's like the part where people are like, how does that just come out of nowhere? I know even for me, I'm like, I never use that word.
I know.
Like, I don't even think about that analogy.
No, yeah. Especially in like a motivation, like that would just never even come to my mind to say something like that. It was interesting. But I love what Josh said in this article of just like, he talked about
friend of the podcast, Josh.
Yes. And he just said it's an opportunity for us to learn and grow. And I just think that was such I feel like, encouraging and humble way to talk about a topic like this, where it could be very easily, it is offensive, and just you could easily maybe take that out on someone, or just use your platform to kind of crush someone or cancel them or whatever. But he used it as an opportunity to help people learn and grow and encourage that. And I just think that was so just awesome, the way that he approached the situation.
Yeah.
Jess, what do you say? You are literally at Jay's fan. I think that's your Twitter handle.
I love the Jays.
I love the Jays. Sorry.
I love them. Yeah. I've loved them way before Coach McDermott was the coach of this team. But I was surprised, because I feel like as far as our city, our basketball team, like, doesn't really, I'm calling it our basketball team. Sorry, Nebraska. Basketball. But there's not a lot that comes out of it. It's like pretty quiet. I feel like they're very respectful. And so this is shocking, because he's a leader in our community. He does a lot with, I think he does a lot with Abide. He does a lot with his team. And so it was shocking. And to me, like, the first thing I want to do when I hear something like this is, like, especially someone that I feel a connection to, like, as a leader in our community, is like, okay, what were the details around it, and what happened? But at the end of the day, in my heart, like, it doesn't matter. Like, it was said, and even if he had good intentions, like, it still hurt somebody. And so it's just hard when it's somebody that, I don't want to say I love the team, but it's just hard when something like that happens. Yeah. And I think, like, this article is excellent. Like, the things that Josh says in here, if you have time to look it up, he says a lot of great things. But what do you guys think about this quote that he says in here? He says, I believe Coach Mack represents many in our city, people who have good intentions but don't have the understanding or experiences to comprehend the gravity of our world's racial challenges.
Yeah, I think he got it right. One of the first people I thought of, even as I was going this, is like, I wonder what Josh thinks about this. And so I texted him, and then I was texting him a little bit today after he wrote this, because that was his response going to be coming out, so he didn't need to really give Alex some really exclusive response. But I know we've had this conversation, about this even on the podcast, and he's talked about Coach Mack on there, and he didn't play for him, and even Creighton this year has taken a lot of heat because they've worn, a BLM, Black Lives Matter sticker. They've had equality on their jerseys. They've taken a lot of heat, and Coach Mack has let that happen. They've put out a lot of videos that are really highlighting the racial inequality. One of the white basketball players in the NBA that's really led the charge in this is Kyle Korver, who is a former Creighton Blue Jay. His younger brother played for Coach Mack. I know he's brought in several basketball players Creighton has this year, including Josh, former basketball players, to really have open, tough dialogue about this. And so to me, I think the shock value was even more knowing they're really trying to, like, fight against this. They've taken a lot of heat for fighting against it. And so that was even more shocking, that someone who's doing what they can, even in this city, to push against that and to help change the narrative has now become the center of this controversy for saying something that is reprehensible. He said it himself. Everyone at the university said it. Josh has said it. It's not okay. It's not kosher. It's not a good thing to say. And so that's where a lot of the shock comes from me, is knowing how hard they've been working to try to work to fix it. But then back to your original question, Jess, it is, I think, a lot of white people, a lot of Midwestern white people are in these same shoes where we're ignorant. We can't obviously feel what it's like to not be white, to be a minority. And so there are probably a lot of people in his shoes that are feeling that same thing.
So true. And it's good to hear an apology in these types of moments, and you hope that those are heartfelt, and you hope that that's a learning thing for people. I think too many times people take the stance of, well, why can't I just say whatever I want? I've always said this. I've always spoke this way. Why does it matter now? So it's good to hear, there's a little shame that comes with it, and hopefully things can turn around. Has there been any discussion of his affecting his career with the Jays, or has anyone heard anything of that?
I mean, it's Twitter right now, so it's all over the. There's people. It's been on ESPN. So there's people calling for his job. Obviously, there's speculation. Like, he has an assistant coach that is actually a part of. The Big East has an assistant coach organization where they're trying to really help with this. And so one of his assistant coaches is a part of that organization. And he put out a statement yesterday saying that they talked with the team. He's very disappointed in Coach McDermott. A lot of the players obviously are deeply hurt by it. He's deeply hurt by it. But in talking to the players, they want to continue to play for him. That was yesterday, but it's always constantly changing. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next few weeks. Tonight they have a huge game against Villanova, who's the best team in there. So it's a tough situation right now. So,
all right. Well, up next, we're going to be continuing this conversation in some ways as we talk about cancel culture. Cancel culture has been described as a removing of support for public figures in response to their objectionable behavior or opinions. Does this sound accurate to everyone? This sounds to me kind of like a mild description of cancel culture in some ways. And I feel like it applies to a lot of different people and a lot of different even products, moving past people. A few examples we've seen lately in the news. You've seen Gina Carano from The Mandalorian. You've seen Morgan Wallen, the country singer. I mean, there's been Ellen DeGeneres. The list could absolutely go on and on and on and on. People being, quote unquote, canceled for a varying amount of reasons, from very dark and disturbing things that they've perpetrated it to some things that maybe are slightly more debatable in the public's eyes. But most recently, the doctor, Mr. Dr. Seuss, has somewhat been canceled, I guess you'd say. At least that's what the headlines are reading. Let's talk a little bit about what it actually means to be canceled, and can you ever recover from a cancellation?
I mean, I think another recent one, we just obviously talked about it in headlines, is like the potential for, Coach McDermott. He said something that's very not good. And so it's going to be interesting to see the repercussions and how fast that cancellation or non-cancellation happens. I also think that part of it is in cancel culture, it affects, liberals, conservatives. It affects pretty much religious people, non-religious people. And then there's also parts of cancel culture that are like, you're dead to us, canceled to us, but then to other people, there's like this almost revival and like sticking with them. And that's a part of it. And so,
and it's in other culture. I mean, other subcultures of like music, TV, sports.
Yeah.
All over the place.
For sure.
I think that's something that's interesting about the Dr. Seuss thing, like canceling Dr. Seuss. I think what's interesting is that we're going back to something that happened a long time ago. And I don't know, I feel like we're in a different state right now where people are really becoming more aware of like these problems and these issues that we need to deal with and we need to handle. And I don't know, I just think it's interesting that now we're going back like so many years to something that was written so long ago. And this wasn't even something they were even talking about or aware of or thinking through or anything like that. And we're canceling that. And I just think that's really interesting. An interesting thing. I don't know. It's something to process through. Like, is that right to go back and look at all these things in the past and cancel certain things that maybe this person wasn't even knowledgeable of or learning about or aware of?
Yeah.
I think that's a big part of it. It's like we're learning and we're growing and we're becoming more aware of these issues. So it's like an interesting balance, I think.
Look, I think we should probably clarify too what this means for Dr. Seuss. This means that his publisher is discontinuing 6 of his books. So it's not like Dr. Seuss is being wiped off the face of the planet. The 6 books are, and to think that I saw it on Mulberry Street, If I Ran the Zoo, I'm going to McElligot's Pool, on Beyond Zebra, Scrambled Egg Super, The Cat's Quizzer. I'm going to admit, I don't think I ever read any of those.
I haven't either. I never heard of any of them.
I've heard it, the zoo, If I Ran the Zoo.
Oh, okay. And I mean, to put it in some perspective, he didn't really have a lot of characters that were of other ethnicities, but when he did, I think I read somewhere where it was like 45 of them total, and like 43 out of the 45 were all, non-white characters who were presented in subservient, kind of dehumanized roles that played into a lot of like what's called, what is it called? I believe it's the Orientalist tropes. So,
okay,
and so that's one of those things where, yeah, it sounds like it's maybe a lot to do about nothing, but I do think there is probably a benefit to at least maybe having this conversation especially because it's a kid's book. So what kind of racial stereotypes are we kind of passing on to our kids when they read this book? I mean, even things like I was having a conversation with someone recently who had no idea that they shouldn't refer to people of Asian descent as Oriental. Like they didn't know that could be considered offensive, So there's just, it goes back to that conversation we were having just a little bit ago about people's ignorance. They just don't know this stuff. And I think as long as you have kind of an open heart and you're willing to listen.
I think especially around kid stuff, we've talked about a couple different times in the past on the podcast about the subliminal messages that we're getting. I mean, sex is integrated into so many things. I mean, racism too. And it's like we're sending a message where maybe that book, if we did read it to our kids, could send a message, and they're picking up on things and they're learning. Yeah. And so maybe it doesn't make sense to us because it's been around for a long time, but I guess revisiting, especially with where our culture is, I don't know.
I think there's people just, in some ways we just need to be honest with what our preconceived notions are. And if we need to apologize for them, then maybe we need to apologize and we can grow past it. But I think there's a lot of those. As a little kid growing up in South Dakota, there was, a lot of white people, and we had a lot of the Native American people there, but you didn't see a lot of other diversity other than that. My exposure to people from Asian countries was mainly like kung fu movies or something like that, because that's what I knew them from. So you build stereotypes just from that. Because I remember being a kid thinking every time I saw someone who was Asian, I assumed they knew karate or something like that. It was just this like weird stereotype that I made as a kid because that was all I knew. And I think sometimes as we reach adulthood, those things just carry on with us. And if we never address them, we don't give ourselves an opportunity to grow past it.
Yeah, and I think too, historically, especially when Dr. Seuss was alive and there was, he was popular, there was this war happening. There were wars happening, and like even a lot of we made ourselves against certain people. Obviously after we were bombed at Pearl Harbor by the Japanese, there was this real sense of these are our enemies, and when we look at somebody as an enemy, that's just a part of our natural reaction, is to make fun of them, belittle them, show why we're superior to them. And I think those are a lot of the downfalls of not seeing people as everybody made in the image of God. And we all have those moments. And so I think especially there's been highlighted times in our country's history where we have made people that are very real enemies. And I think when you make somebody an enemy, it makes it more okay to hurt them, to kill them, to not look at their lives as sacred, and all of those types of things. And so in that World War culture, but then for me, one of the places that I've used, I think, I don't remember what Dr. Seuss book it is, but one of the books I've even used to teach my kids of the value of other people is Dr. Seuss. Even some of his writing. Yeah, Horton Hears a Who. Yeah. And so that's one of those books that's like a classic, hey, everybody matters. We're all a little different. We're all a little quirky, but everybody matters. And so there's like this weird, as I hear this stuff, I'm like, oh, I thought he was very good at. And I think that was a later, I think, that book, is my understanding from reading very little research this week, was a response to understanding some of the offensiveness that he had been creating in some of his other writings. So,
well, I think, you speak of the World War II. We've seen a resurgence of Asian hate crimes and prejudice just because of COVID-19 and the coronavirus, because that potentially originated from China, and you're seeing people act out against that again. It's just ignorance and prejudice.
Yeah. So outside of this, I think part of the things that lead into cancel culture in a huge way, and it's because we have a medium. Like even right now, the fact that we have a podcast, we have a new medium in 2021 to begin to share our opinions and get them out there, that even in 2011, 2001 were not available to people. Very and true. So social media, and I think that's where understanding digital immigrants and digital natives and all of this stuff comes into play, is maybe people in an older generation are like, we're so much more soft now, or we cancel everything now. And part of it is because we're far more aware of everything now. And even if we look at our history of who dominated the news, who got to say, who got to write in op-eds, who got to say who was published, a lot of those things, were people in power were able to suppress those who weren't and not give them a voice. And so I think now we're living in the repercussions of people being able to have their own platforms and their own voices and not being suppressed. And so I think things were said, but they were just hidden. Yeah, like what you guys talked about last week with Robbie, is we're living in this place where it was much easier to hide a lot of the things, especially for those in power, because you could control a narrative. And now we're seeing that we don't get to control the narrative as much anymore. And it's scary.
And the people who are reading or taking whatever you're putting out there aren't necessarily people that are close to you, who know your heart, who know you, and would maybe pull you aside and say, hey, in that conversation you said something that was kind of offensive and I wanted to talk to you about it. And if they see it on the internet or you post it somewhere, it's like you can't take that back, and people aren't going to be as maybe full of grace with you and
forgiving.
And because they don't know you. Maybe they just see what you said, and that's a representative of who you are. And it's going to be more quick to just, okay, I'm going to cancel this person or whatever.
Well, and I think because of the internet, the world is so much smaller that you and some good old boys could be talking about something, someone could make a joke, not think anything of it, and maybe it just stays in that room. But the moment that airs out and broadcasts to the world, there's so many people who can be affected and hurt by that without you realizing it, because all these cultures now have kind of joined into this one online community. And I think so many times as Americans, we're so guilty of just being, focused on ourselves and the way, our own comforts. And, I think for a long time the term first world problems was such a thing that we would kind of make a joke about, but we don't really think about the luxuries that we're afforded living in this country, and sometimes the way we talk about it, or the way we're even just take it for granted how that can look to other people across the globe. So,
and once it starts, it goes so fast you can't even keep up. And I know we kind of keep going back to Coach McDermott, but Alex, you sent us the article. It was an Omaha.com article, and then it was like an hour later, I think you sent an ESPN article of just how fast it moves. You can't even keep up with it.
Yeah. All right. So let's turn the conversation a little bit to us personally. Have any of you at this table been canceled? Anyone?
Not by definition of removing public support, because I'm not like, I'm not some kind of political figure or some figure that could actually be canceled nationally. But there's probably definitely times where, even I've heard on this podcast, like as reaction to things I've said on this podcast, that I have been labeled as something, as either too conservative or too liberal. I've been accused of both from people and feedback. And so therefore, because of that and how people hear something on here, they're like, I'm not going to, I don't trust that person. I don't, and it goes from like, okay, I don't agree with their opinion to like, they must not be able to interpret the Bible. They're not a good preacher. And so like, it's crazy how fast, you can go down a road like that.
Oh yeah. I don't think I've ever been canceled to my knowledge, because I'm assuming that you'd know that you were canceled. Guys,
be on Twitter.
Maybe Alex is hiding the comments of Jess getting canceled, but that was one of the fears I had. Saying yes to doing this last year was my words are recorded and I'm making personal thoughts and opinions public. And so that fear is there, especially being in the middle of so much cancel culture happening now. It seems very easy.
It is scary on a podcast like this, especially because of the stuff that we're talking about. Like, we're not talking about stuff that's just like light, go happy, we're not just bantering the whole time or whatever. We're like really talking about intense topics. And so it is scary to feel like I could have said something and maybe it just came out, or the way you said it was not really the way you meant to say it, and just that's out there on the internet for people to hear and perceive, and it is kind of scary. But I think especially for people who aren't on like really high platforms of like, there's a lot of followers, like I don't have a lot of followers or people like that. I feel like if I got canceled by someone, I wouldn't even know it. Like, it's just like I wouldn't even know. I feel like these are more of movements of canceling something, and it's very obvious and people are aware of it. So I'm not aware if I have been canceled or not. So
yeah, I don't publicly know. I think on personal levels sometimes people cancel you and you don't you don't know it, or maybe you find out later. Just to use that term extremely loosely. I guess let's flip it a little bit then. Is there anybody that we've canceled? Anybody that we're like, I was just, you're done, you're out, I'm cutting you out, or, whatever that might look like. I think from a Christian standpoint, that's maybe that's a pretty hard road to take and to justify. So,
yeah. And I would say if I've ever done anything like that, it's been less about this person made this one mistake and they apologize for it and we're really trying to, improve on their mistake or whatever. And it's more about if someone has maybe made a stance or taken a stand on something that is really just not a good, it's not biblical, or I don't, believe that. And then maybe I'm supporting them in a certain way or whatever. And I'm like, okay, maybe I don't want to put my support towards this person who is clearly, doing something that's not biblical or whatever. But I feel like if people make mistakes, I'm always quick to be like, okay, this was weird. This was a mess up. How are they going to apologize? Are they going to, try and fix this, and then kind of go from there?
Yeah.
I I feel like I could get canceled over this.
Okay.
But
I
really wrestled with, and I still have opinions. I think this was another thing that we talked about on the podcast, but John Christ, I don't think
he was someone who got canceled,
but he kind of is uncanceled. But I feel like there's also this section of the cancel culture where like you're maybe not canceled, but I don't trust you. Like you're not as funny to me. You're not as alluring to me, and you're kind of just there. Like I pass on by. So sorry if people love him. I know he's still successful, but he's somebody. And then I definitely, you can Google information on this because it's probably not appropriate for the podcast, but I definitely, muted R. Kelly. Because definitely. And I support canceling him 100%.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever personally canceled anyone, but there's definitely people that I've canceled on behalf of my kids, I guess. There's people I'm like, I would have enjoyed that, but I'm not going to ever let my kids be introduced to, maybe an R. Kelly or, something like that, where I'm like, okay. I know like Eminem is like one of those people right now that's, there's like people want to cancel him and I mean, probably for some good reason in some ways, because I think we're all deserving to be canceled, at some level.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's things I'm like, okay, now I have an awareness, or even songs like that I heard, like I like the beat and it was cool to dance to when I was younger, and I really never considered the lyrics. Like I remember, and I've talked about this.
Because it made you feel young.
Yeah, it made me feel young. But I remember like my youth pastor one time, like having like a parent meeting, and I don't remember what song it was, maybe To the Window, to the Wall, or something like that. And like,
classic.
And there was like the top 3 songs, and he had the parent meeting and read word for word, hey, these are what your kids are listening to. And I mean, you're just like sinking in your chair as a child. And it was like the most awkward thing ever, but you just don't understand. And I know even this year, right? Like the most popular song that was out there, I would never let my kid listen to that.
So bad, yeah.
I hope not.
Yeah, and so it's crazy, like what can and can't and does and doesn't like.
You bring up a really good point though. I have seen the meme going around. I
think I shared it.
Yeah, I saw it, and I think it brings up a nuanced conversation though.
People might not know what we're talking about. I know it's a little inappropriate.
It's a song called WAP. We'll just call it that, and that's if you know, and if you don't need to know because it's not worth knowing. But it was rated as it won awards for the best song of 2020 or something like that. But people are comparing that song, like this vulgar song is the most popular song, and yet we're canceling Dr. Seuss, And I think that I understand the heart behind it, but I think this is like the trappings that a lot of times we fall into with this cancel culture stuff, where we want to compare apples to oranges, and we want to just to kind of force like our agenda on people and say, well, you're okay with being vulgar, but you're not okay with Dr. Seuss. And I think that I'm not saying I have the answers to this, but I do think there's probably a much more nuanced conversation about, what does it mean? Like for many eras in our history, there's been very vulgar eras. I mean, that is one thing where you could say, well, hey, I'm not a prude, so it doesn't bother me, whatever, I listen to it. But again, there is, it is a choice to go and find that source of entertainment. But I think when we're talking about racism and we're talking about things that perpetuate racist stereotypes, that's something that hurts large people groups. And so I think that we have to be careful in comparing the two, because I don't want to listen to that song. But if someone, it's just like our faith. Like we choose to follow Jesus. So if someone doesn't choose that we can't force them. And if they want to listen to the vulgar thing, or if they want to watch stuff that they shouldn't be watching, they're going to make that decision. It's not what we believe as a Christian. It's not what we want for our families. And that's why it feels scary sometimes. But I mean, I don't know. Where do you guys land on that?
I think that there's a lot of wisdom in what you just said, because I think that you really, like, for me, I feel like I just learned something from you of just we can look at cancel culture as a whole melting pot of everything that, offends somebody in a section, but it really is looking almost like, I don't want to say case by case. That sounds really formal for this, but even just looking at, okay, this Dr. Seuss issue it's a separate issue in cancel culture, and something else is going to come up, but it doesn't mean that, like you're saying, apples to oranges. And it really is a challenge on our part of, hey, like, what's going on? What is the issue? Do I just cancel somebody because Alex is tweeting about it? Mm-hmm. And I trust him?
It goes into this bigger conversation of, oh, well, if you're canceling that, why aren't you canceling this? Mm-hmm. And they're not. That's the problem. Is they're not the same thing. Yep. We might not like either, but they're not the same thing.
Absolutely, I agree with that.
I think to me, like the counter argument to like that song, for example, is women. The objectification of women is a terrible thing. I mean, it's not just the objectification of women, but as I think of like my young daughters, I'm like, hey, it's things like that lead down to, the worst moments. And you can start to take it to like, okay, that leads to like a huge issue with pornography. It leads to a huge issue with the slaves, like the sex slave trade and things like that are happening behind the scenes. And so
it has our value for our bodies.
Just comparison.
And I think that's where like I totally agree, because it is apples to oranges, and what we can do about it and who's promoting, that song, because even if you get behind the scenes in the music industry, like
it's calculated.
It's so calculated, and people are paying for this kind of stuff, so you can't totally compare both of those things, but they are both. But we could constantly be like this, that, and if we live our lives like comparing, well, this is worse than that, and this is actually okay because this is worse. Then it becomes this mute argument, and we can keep making it.
It is also a thing where the conversation, we can't, as Christians, we need to be passionate, right, about what we believe. That's part of our faith. But if you look at the things that we get most riled up about, the things that we're most, that we would cancel. I was looking at a thing that said 8 out of 10 of the most banned books in the U.S. have LGBTQ themes in them, and that's because of like Christian movements to ban those books. And I'm not saying, I'm not going to tell you that's right or wrong, but I'm also saying it depends on what the subject is, who sees themselves as right and wrong.
I think it's just like with what we're talking about, it's easy to invalidate another person's feelings by bringing up something else. And maybe that's not the best way to handle the situation of, well, this is kind of like what Alex was saying. Well, this was worse, so that's really not that bad. But validating these people's feelings, validating what they're saying and trying to listen to them. And also going back to with cancel culture, it is kind of, you sent us an article, Jess, about how it strengthens social bonds. And I think it's easy for people to hop on these cancel trains, if you will, because they're like, but that's what everybody's saying, that's what everybody's doing, and that's going to make me feel a part of something, that's going to make me feel cool or feel like I'm in the know or in the it crowd. Instead of, and I think sometimes people are doing this and they're not even looking into the situation or what's going on or doing their own research. And I think that's where it can get really bad, is if we're just jumping on these cancel trains and not even, they tried to cancel Netflix, and like there's stuff like that where it's just like you can just see what people are posting and see that and jump on that without trying to, figure out, okay, what do I believe about this? How do I feel about this? Do I feel like this is a valid reason? It's got to be your own kind of thought process instead of just doing what other people say.
It's like we have to be discerning about this stuff, because we are in a culture where our feelings are being manipulated all the time, like all the time, whether it is Twitter, whether it is cancel culture, we're being manipulated to feel a certain way about certain things. But I think we got to kind of stay on that level plane and really lean into our discerning.
And I think we have to ask ourselves, and maybe we not just ask ourselves, we take the step of asking people around us, am I known more for what I'm against or what I'm for? Like when you survey my life, when you survey my social media feed, when you survey the way I talk about people, when you survey like what I do and how I use my platform, is that are you hearing more about what I'm against, or do you know what I'm for? And I think, unfortunately, for Christians, we can very easily, and we should have conviction, and we should be against things that are not good and not right and are, anti-biblical. We should be against those things. But if my entire life and my sounding off is things I'm against, and it reminds me of Paul's words in Corinthians, I'm just a gong. He says, if you have not love, then you're just a bunch of static in someone's ears. And so unfortunately, that's something as Christians we have to be on the lookout for.
This falls kind of into the labeling thing, and I'm not a fan of putting labels on stuff, but I think you see cancel culture, you hear or things like the woke mob, or things like people are coming for the woke mob's coming for you, or different things like that. And with cancel culture, whatever side you're on, it's easy sometimes for maybe for Christians to look at the Dr. Seuss thing and go, this is so mild and tame. There's other bad things happening. This is cancel culture. And immediately to get outraged because you see a headline. And that's our first reaction is, why would they do that? There's other things that are more important. But I think because what we do as human beings, we love to put labels on things. So we put everything, we start to put people who agree with this into the cancel culture box, right? And we kind of trap them in there. And the thing that happens from that naturally is that we've dehumanized them, because now it's just this movement. That's all. Those are the people that are cancel culture people. They want to ruin our society because they're going to cancel you. Where really it's like, okay, what are they canceling? They're canceling marginalized people. Is it not part of our faith to stand up for the marginalized, the people who aren't being represented well? Is it not, is that not like the Christian's job to why wouldn't Christians be leading the charge in some of this stuff to go, hey, you know what? These people are being marginalized. These people are there's maybe it's not as obvious to everyone, but there's hate being spread around this culture or this type of community. Like that, we should be excited to lead that charge, because that's what Christ did. He was there for the marginalized. And so it's so easy as Christians to be so reductive sometimes to say, well, I don't like cancel culture, so they're canceling Dr. Seuss. I'm going to throw them all in the box with the cancel culture. And now I don't have to think about it as human beings anymore. It's just cancel culture.
I think, too, there's a lot of Christians that are doing that really well. The inverse is they're humble, and so they're not doing as loud. Yeah, they're not as loud, and they shouldn't be as loud. I mean, I think Josh is one of those people. Even he writes pretty candidly about his dad, who was white and learned a lot of things about his upbringing that were insensitive, that were a part of it. But he's not out there holding pickets and making signs and all that kind of stuff, because he's working behind the scenes and they're seeing a lot of that change. But we don't always get to hear that, because usually good stories don't make the that's not what people buy. I just got done watching the whole Britney Spears documentary, Free Britney, hashtag that. But
wait, is that next week's episode?
Maybe. Yeah. But yeah, the thing, these people are getting millions of dollars to get a picture of her in her worst moments, because that's what sells. And so train wrecks sell. And so we try to do that, because that's where there's money in that too.
Yeah. And I think going back to what you were talking about, Alex, of what are we for, not what are we against? I feel like in this conversation, it's easy to feel overwhelmed. There's a lot of stuff out there that I feel like I need to figure out. Should I cancel this? Should I not? Should I be allowing this? Should I not? And I feel like for parents too, man, the fact that Dr. Seuss is something that's getting canceled, something that maybe you didn't even think was, ever going to have issues like that. I feel like it can be overwhelming for people to be like, how do I even go about all these things and figure out what should I do? But I think you make such a good point of, maybe it's not always about what are we against, but what are we for, and really focusing on those things, because I think when you do focus on that, it's going to overflow into the other areas of your life, and it's going to make it, kind of, and Eric, kind of what you were talking about, as Christians, we want to love, we want to serve other people, we want to stand up for, the minorities and that kind of stuff. And so I just think focusing more on what are we for is such a helpful thing to think about when it feels kind of overwhelming.
I think the other part too, before we get too much into like turning a corner and looking at how Jesus approached this is there's accountability, and we are called to be accountable, for our actions. I think James talks about this, for Christian leaders that, there's life and death in the tongue, and we are called to a standard of choosing our words wisely, and we should be held accountable for these types of things. I think Coach McDermott should be held accountable for saying that and have to figure out, hey, what's at the root of this? How did this even come out? So there's accountability that should happen, but that doesn't always equal cancellation. And so I think the other part of the problem sometimes is we want to abuse grace and think that there's not anything, that grace is this blanket statement that, sin doesn't have to be paid for. But the reality is, no, it was paid for in a pretty gory way. Like, no sin's not getting paid for. Every sin is being atoned at a great price because of Christ. And so sometimes we just like, oh, well, just give them free grace. Well, no, like Jesus was lashed and beaten because of that, because it was a real sin. It was real pain and real sorrow. And so it's not just like, oh, it's free, that's been paid, you get out of debt for free. That's not how it worked. And so sometimes we abuse what grace looked like by thinking I shouldn't have to be accountable for what I did. And
I think too that there are, when you want to talk about cancel cultures, there are cultures that need to be canceled. There are, whether that's Nazi, white supremacy, KKK type cultures, whether that is like sexual predators that we talked about last, people who subscribe to these types of behaviors need to be canceled. Whether you don't like that term or you don't want to use that term, call it anything else, but at some point they need to be.
And I don't know if you guys can relate to this, but when things in cancel culture come up, I'm not the type of person that just accepts it because Alex tweeted it.
Yeah.
Or I read an article. It's like, why? Like, if I'm going to cancel somebody too, I want to know why I'm doing it. And so I think that there's accountability and there's responsibility.
Right. Well, and there's so many times there's multiple sides to a story when it's something that has to do with like sexual abuse.
Right.
And I think that's wise. That should be something that we do before we jump on the bandwagon, before we, on either side of it, whether we jump on the outrage or we jump in the party and go, yeah, they should be canceled. I mean, you can wait before you share your opinion. It's a safe thing to do. And I mean, as we talk about Dr. Seuss, I think it is clear it's important to be clear and define that I don't think Dr. Seuss got canceled. 6 of his books got canceled. They're still going to publish the rest of his books. So I think that the headlines even are misleading to kind of lead to this outrage where people are getting upset. It's like, yeah, 6 books that I'd never even heard of are going to not be published anymore. So it's not probably as big of a deal as some people are making it out to be. You hit on a little bit, Alex, but how do we think Jesus would respond to cancel culture? Would he respond kind of like you, Jess, where he'd say, okay, let's wait and let's find out the whole story?
WWJD.
He'd say,
I got the bracelet on.
Yep.
He would love first. That's the answer, I think.
Yep.
But I think Jesus had plenty of people he could have canceled. His, Thomas doubted him, like, bro, you just hung out with me. I told you I was going to rise again from the dead. What do you mean you need to touch, you need to touch the hole? Or Peter, who obviously didn't, like, literally, bro, you're going to deny me. I don't think Jesus said bro, but either way, maybe. You're going to deny me. And you did 3 times, but Jesus came and he restored, and his brother, doubted him for a long time. Even we're reading this book of Leviticus as we go through a church, and there's a lot of reasons that people should be canceled. And we'll continue to find out that Jesus, his entire Sermon on the Mount was brilliantly anti-cancel culture. And so all these things that religious people wanted to cancel and wanted to have problems with, and they wanted to draw hard lines. Jesus, he who's without sin cast the first stone. Like they were trying to cancel that lady right there. And so I think it's the cancel culture is totally opposite of the gospel message of what redemption is. for redemption to happen, something bad had to have happened. And so we do, like I said, we should be accountable, and Jesus does hold us accountable for our sins, and we will no sin, nothing that's ever happened that's a part of sin is going to go unpunished. And I think we have to realize that, even mine. And I think when you realize, man, I deserve to be canceled by God, like, I think you start, the more and more we realize the depth of our sin and the depth of how much we should be canceled, the more and more we become grateful for a God who came and rescued us while we were still sinners. Christ died for us. Not before we said yes, but while we were still sinners, while we were deserving of being canceled.
Yeah, and Jesus wasn't canceling people. If he ever canceled anything, it was actions or things that they were doing. Like I think people might think, oh, but what about when Jesus went into the temple and knocked down all the tables and was angry but he wasn't canceling people. He was canceling their actions and the way that they were acting. And so I think that's an important thing too, to think through. Man, some of the actions might not be the best, but yeah, are we going to cancel people, or are we going to maybe just cancel what they're doing?
Yeah.
I think applying it to my own personal life, as I look at cancel culture, I see a lot of people who aren't being heard, aren't being validated, aren't being seen as children of God, or there's a message that it's like this desperate way, not always desperate, but sometimes, of just getting a message out like this happened to me, or this offended me, and this hurt me. And it just reminds me, like, I need to be listening to people. It even goes back to what we were talking about last week of just, are we a safe place where somebody that, that's valid concerns, everything that we've talked about, like, how are we listening to people that aren't being heard? Because I think that's a lot of it is.
Yeah, for sure.
A lot of the stuff comes out on social media, TikTok, Facebook, all these places.
And that's one thing I love about what some of the things that we do on our podcast is, man, we want to listen to people's stories and hear their stories and their heart behind things, because you can talk about a subject all day long, but if you don't know somebody's heart and their story and how something has hurt them or broken them, that is going to change everything for how you view something.
Well, and so much of the outrage around cancel culture is around, oh, we're just being too sensitive as a society. Everybody's just too sensitive, and we rely too much on our feelings, and I just don't. I mean, sure, we could be course correcting one way or the other, but so many times, you look at, like, even a young boy who was raised by a hard dad who just is like, a gruff guy who's just, this is how it is, this is what you do. You don't cry, you don't do this, you don't do that, you don't worry about your feelings, whatever, and I think at some point that stuff has to course correct a little bit. And I think, we have a lot of people who are taught that feelings are weakness, or that if you have emotions, you're showing weakness. And so then with cancel culture comes this kind of masculine theme of, like, well, they just need to get over it, buck up, whatever. And I think when we hear the way Jesus would respond to that, he would love first. He would show compassion. He would show empathy. And we can't just have these, just because we have these gut reactions sometimes to things that are happening in our culture, it can't just be like, we can't just put it aside as, oh, they're being too sensitive. Because like you said, Rachel, we don't know their stories. We don't know how this affects someone, especially if we don't live in their shoes.
Yeah.
On a final note, can cancel culture go too far, do you think? Can it do, unrepairable damage?
I think for me, one of the thoughts I ask myself when I see somebody else fall or stumble is, am I taking pleasure in someone else's misfortune? And I think cancel culture can be one of those things where we begin to, and it's not healthy, but it's natural as part of being in a sin-stained world. Am I taking pleasure out of somebody else's bad decisions, or is it going to get me ahead in some way, or whatever? And so, man, that's malice, and I think that's evil, and that's not good, and it's not at the heart of God. And so, but I go there. Like, I want to go there. A lot of times when I see someone being canceled, or when I see somebody do something bad, my my first gut reaction a lot of times is like, is wanting to celebrate that and not grieve for and with them. And so I think that's a thing I'm constantly having to invite the Spirit to work on in my life.
I feel like one of the biggest areas where I see cancel culture going too far is in politics and how people treat politicians and how they talk about them and just tear them down and just really that is like where I see it just going way too far, because these are people. I mean, especially for Christians, it's like these are people, these are God's creation, and no matter what they've done or what they believe, they are still God's like child. And like the way that you are talking about them and treating them and calling them out in certain ways, I think that's just where it can go really way too far.
Well, and yeah, as that example, it's even worse when it's things they didn't do. People are just, when it's someone who's a bigot or a sexual predator, we can kind of go, okay, well, sometimes you do have to hold these people accountable, right? This is probably just. But then when it's people who are just being slandered for stuff that they didn't actually do.
I'm still learning and trying to figure out why we can cancel a celebrity, but we're not canceling pornography. We're not canceling child trafficking. Like why isn't that something that is a hashtag? So it's like sometimes it seems like, okay, there's legitimate reasons for everything that we've canceled, but like if we're gonna use this, like sometimes I'm just like, why aren't we using it to cancel Pornhub or something like that, where it's like we're not done with this culture. I think it's gonna keep going. I think that we've just kind of hit the tip of the iceberg, and we'll see more. But
hopefully, no one wants to cancel us now.
So I just got the email. So sorry, we're canceled until next season. No, I'm just kidding. We'll be back. This conversation could continue, and I think you bring up extremely valid points. And there's so many nuanced areas to navigate in this conversation that we'll never cover them all. Hopefully this, if nothing else, it served as another gateway to people having this conversation themselves and with the ones that they love. And that's the best we can hope for some days. So thanks everybody for listening. We do appreciate that. If you have any questions or concerns, you can reach out to us on social media at CCC Omaha, or you can send us an email to podcast@cccomaha.org, and we would love to hear from you. Until then, we'll talk to you later.